This is the Woodland Mansion in a flat world. As you can see, it's massive with a lot of repeated patterns and not too much of a pretty exterior. In this video, we're going to transform this into this. And it's not going to be easy. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. With a project as large as this, we need to take it logically. So the first thing that Pearlescent Moon and I are going to do is plan this build out. We're going to imagine all of the extra bits that we're going to put on this to make it more interesting. As it's a giant square, adding shapes and adding structure to this is vital to making it look a bit better. However, we do not want to lose the original feel of the build. It's still going to be a woodland mansion with some stone mixed in with it, and it's going to have a very similar feel but look a lot nicer. So we've got all of our plans ready. However, we definitely will not be sticking to it as hard as we originally thought. We're going to start by defining the style of this build, and since even once it has all the extra shapes, it's going to be a lot of repeated patterns, getting this right is the most crucial part of this build, because if we get it wrong, the whole thing is going to look wrong. So there's a lot of trial and error and testing out styles here, but as you can see, we're trying to maintain the original look of the Woodland Mansion. So we've got that middle bit in between that just details and separates the two stories of the house. We've got the windows, however we've changed them to be stained glass instead of the original normal glass. We've also added some depth, which the original had, just a little bit more. We've also added some outlines and some minor details just to give the windows a bit more shape rather than being square. The roof had to change pretty much entirely. It wasn't going to be an easy task to make this roof work with dark oak planks, so we opted to have some clay in there instead to give it some much needed colour, albeit grey. On the front we have a unique symbol just to this mansion, and we decided green to match the brown in the forest. So the next bit that we need to do, now that we've got our style defined and our front door made, we need to add those bits that we planned for in the scaffolding. And now the obvious first thing to do is to fill it in with wood altogether. This will allow us to sculpt it much like clay to make it work for us in what we envisioned. However, since this is the first one, we haven't quite got the style down yet, so there's still a bit of experimenting to do. We've put in some large windows and we've mimicked the style from the front door. However, the top is jutting out and we weren't quite sure how to tackle it. We originally thought that we'd make it larger at the top to make it seem a bit top heavy. However, it ended up looking more castle-like instead of mansion-like. So without any hesitation, we just removed it and decided that was a bad job on that one, and we were going to take a different route with it. When you're building on a large project like this, it's absolutely fine to redo something that isn't quite working for you. We decided to go for a more simplistic roof just on the outcrop, and it worked wonders. Our major focus was going to be on that top half. Of course, because we scaled that down, we had to scale some of the other scaffolding down as well. This corner here was quite simple. It was a simple repeated pattern from the front door, but we were going to need to make sure that it was the right proportion for this size of the build. You may have noticed that I'm commentating this not as a tutorial but more as a let's build. That's because this project took us 6 hours with creative and world edit. If you were to take this in survival, I don't think there's a tutorial in the world long enough to help you. So I'm just sort of going to commentate over our thought process and our building process so that that could help you if you were to undertake a task like this. And I hope for those of you building a mansion that some of the tips will help you, because a lot of the techniques that we're using will apply to many of those structures. So let's move on. We're going to copy paste the right side to the left side, and that completes almost the front. As you can see from our scaffolding, there's that little bit on the top, and the reason we need that bit on the top is because it's so flat on the front. We need this feature piece to make it better. Now obviously this isn't transforming the original structure, we are adding this on, and that's okay because sometimes you need a bit of supplementary shape, especially when you're dealing with a massive cube-like structure as the Woodland Mansion is. As long as we keep it in style and we keep the same theming, I see no problem with adding parts onto it. So what we've done is just added a large piece in the middle and 2 accompanying parts, just so that it doesn't look too out of place freestanding on its own. Those 2 bits either side act as a supporting role to the structure. It's got a really deep window, and that is the feature piece that your eye should be drawn to when you look at the front of the build. On the roof, we've just mimicked exactly what we did down there, making sure that we've got a nice shape that curves over the top, but keeps those 3 areas distinguished. We've actually done the hardest part. We've defined the style and we've finished one side. We're about 1 hour into us building, condensed down to like 5.5 minutes. So we now need to move on to one of the biggest challenges of this build, which is what we do with really long stretches of wall. We actually have a very small woodland mansion here. Sometimes they can be so big that it would be an impossible task to make a definable structure out of it. So if you find yourself attempting this with a group of your friends perhaps, there's no shame in cutting down your workload. Chop some of the build up, make it work for you. What we decided to do to distinguish this side of the build was add a walkway without any windows, so that it had this light airiness and broke up some of it. Because it's just repeated patterns of window, 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 we want to be able to have something else there to make those more important. So this walkway was the best idea that we could come up with. It's a bunch of empty archways with a little bit of detail and some stone brick to walk through, but we're also going to detail this with some colour. Now the best way to add colour to a build like this is actually through vegetation most of the time, because if you add a new block to your palette, it can really start to mess with it. And we've got very, very neutral colours. We've got brown, we got grey, and that's pretty much it. We got a bit of green, but we can add some colour with flowers just to highlight our neutral colours. So that's what we've done there in between each of the archways. So if you do look through there, you can see some garden work. Above our little walkway that we've made, we needed to add some windows, but obviously that area was too small to have those full height windows that we made before. So to fill it in, we made some slightly smaller ones, cut to size, and added a little pattern on either side to match. So over the top, we now need to wrap around our roof to fit in. You'll notice that we dug a huge hole into the middle of our build, and I'll come back to that later because it's quite important. For now, we have this square cut into the side of the mansion just through sheer random generation. Instead of covering this up, we decided to use it for a feature piece. This is only the side of the house, but if you do end up looking at it, we want it to be special. So we created the outcrop to look like everything else, so it's wholly unremarkable, but where the indent is, we decided to cut in even further and add a little statue within it with some water. The water also helps highlight with some colour the neutral colours that we have. So the blue really stands out there, and it does really feel like a centre piece. We didn't do any garden work in front of it, but if we weren't in a flat world, I definitely would do that as well. At the back of the build, you can see we've got these 3 structures from our original conception build. However, we decided to cut it down much like we did the front and create smaller outcrops than we originally thought. It's quite important to have an open mind. When we started this project, we didn't know what this mansion was going to look like. Only through defining the style and working to some rough scaffolding did we define what this build was going to look like. So do try and be flexible, do try and have an open mind, listen to your friends if they've got some suggestions, and just experiment away. We're copying the same style that we've done for the rest of the build, so there's not a lot to say about this bit. We need to repeat this over and over again. But you will notice that we have 3 different sizes of window. You need to work to the shape that you create. Now, I'm not saying that every single window needs to be different, you just need to make sure that it's consistent throughout your build. Underneath, instead of having a separate window, we decided to add another pattern, which we seem to have added on every single side so far. Using World Edit, which is a great tool, we copy pasted all of those segments so that they matched, and that's the back of the build done. If I were to go back and change anything, I'd perhaps add a door, seeing as it is the back of the mansion. We only have one official door for the entire build. Some of you may be wondering, what are we going to do with the interior? Well, for the most part, we're going to leave it as it was. It worked out quite well, but tackling the interior is a completely different video than transforming the outside, which is what this series is about. So this is the final side of the build, and it's probably the most difficult side to face because not only is it one long stretch of build, it's also got that extra height to deal with. So we actually decided to cop out a little bit and copy paste what we did on the other side, and again have repeated patterns throughout this build, but it worked out quite well. This is, say, the normal side of the build. This doesn't have a great big feature, it doesn't have a statue with water coming out of it. This is just a normal side of the build. Not every single side needs something truly remarkable about it, so we decided to keep the same style that the original had of having plenty of repeated windows one after the other and just working to any space that we needed to fill in. So using World Edit, we made short work of that bit. However, in the center, we've got a little bit of work to do because we made that hole that I mentioned earlier. Now, the point of that was to allow us to have these thinner roofs. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with European architecture, but when you make a mansion, you don't tend to have one huge roof over a large building. You tend to have these courtyards, and we decided to add one of these because it helps keep that roof under control, and it's a nice feature piece if you are on the inside. Having that natural light come through the middle and perhaps having a statue is just really, really nice. So we decided to add these empty arches again, and I indeed emptied some of the interior just so that you couldn't see the weird illagers in there. Instead of, you can just see some birch wood, so it's no big deal. We had a little indent here at the top where we wanted a feature balcony. There's nothing too exciting about it, it's just got a door, it's got some lounges on it. It's just to have somewhere to sit and look down into the courtyard because it's not that bad of a view. Down at the bottom, we worked out where the centre was, which was unfortunately 2 blocks wide one way and 1 block wide the other. We decided to make a little fountain, which wouldn't be too hard. Now, I couldn't, in all honesty, be bothered to make a proper statue, so I decided to make a modern art type thing with just a random shape and some water coming out of it, which worked absolutely fine. Something overly complicated would fill that space too much. So we also added some grass and some flowers for colour, and that really helped give some vibrancy to this rather dark looking build. And that pretty much brings an end to the courtyard there. We've just got a few walls left to fill in, and then this build will be 100% complete. Because these are some of the more awkward shapes that we have to work with, we need to make some unique shapes for them. We can't just use the same windows that we used everywhere else because they are odd sizes and they won't fit. Forcing them in with World Edit would probably cost us more time than to make it from scratch. So as you can see, at the top of the courtyard we added a large feature window, which in fact draws your eye to that point if you were looking at this angle. We also added a nice courtyard, as you can guess, to break up that huge amount of roof that would have to be there otherwise. So we're pretty much at the end of this build. We have transformed this vanilla structure that was a series of repeated patterns in a large block to this. Still a lot of repeated patterns, but it's got an overall shape and it's more recognizable as a grand mansion, but it still contains most of the original interior, and it's quite important when you transform something to keep the essence of the original. We still have mostly the same palette, we still have the original shape, albeit we have added to it. It's still a woodland mansion, and if I wasn't transforming this and I was just building a mansion, I probably wouldn't have made this. So it was a really cool opportunity to make something unique. And I think this has been one of the most successful transformations that I've ever done, and it's been so highly requested by you guys who have been begging me to do it for a really long time, but I've been putting it off because it's such a difficult task. If any of you out there think that this was an easy job, you are sorely mistaken. Like I said, it took us like 4.5 hours with World Edit, and there was 2 people working on it. Speaking of which, I have to say a huge thank you to Pearlescent Moon, who helped me put this together. I wouldn't have been able to get through this without her. So a huge thank you to her, and a huge thank you to all of you who have watched this video. I now ask you to please leave a comment giving your opinion on this build and giving me some more ideas for the future. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Goodbye.